Hi, today I will discuss to you writing a scientific paper. And just to tell you, the rationale for this lecture is that I want you, when you write a manuscript, a scientific paper, I want you to write a scientific paper, a manuscript that can be published in a medical journal. So everything about this lecture is about writing a scientific paper that can be published in a medical journal. Because really we want you to, when you write a manuscript, a research paper, we really want you to publish it in a medical journal. I often say to people that making a research without publishing it is really a waste of time. Well, it's like a waste of time. But of course, it won't be a waste of time for you because this is a requirement for you. But nevertheless, don't look at it as a requirement, but better that if you look at your paper, when you write your paper, better that you look at it as one way of, of publishing your paper. And so, writing the scientific paper, and this will be the different topics that we will be discussing. First, we will be talking of an appropriate title, abstract, and keywords, and then writing the introduction next, then writing the methodology. We'll also talk of writing, how to write, the results of the discussion, and then making tables and figures, and lastly, citing the references. Okay, so the first topic is how to write an effective title and abstract and choose appropriate keywords. And some key takeaways: without a title, abstract, and keywords, and these are the key marketing tool for research papers. Most papers may never be read or even be found by interested readers. So that these three things, title, abstract, and keywords, are really our way so that our paper can be read, can be discovered to begin with, and read ultimately by interested readers. Now, good research paper titles use descriptive terms and phrases that accurately highlight the core content of the paper. And then the abstract should provide a quick and accurate summary of the paper to help the reader decide whether the rest of the paper is worth reading. And lastly, keywords ensure that your paper is indexed well by databases and search engines and thus improve discoverability of your research. And therefore, keywords should be selected after careful consideration. And this is my source, my reference for this lecture. Now, as an introduction, researchers normally spend most of their time on the meat of the article, meaning the methods, the results, and the discussion sections. They spend much time writing all of this. And then very little goes into the title, very little time goes into the title and abstract, and keywords even lesser. And keywords are often being typed out on the spot during submission in a journal. So if, for example, people will ask you to submit your paper in a journal and you need to write keywords as well, and so people will just very, very quickly on the spot, they write the keywords without really thinking should what should be written in the keywords. Okay. But ironically, these three elements, the title, the abstract, and the keywords, may well hold the key to publication success. So I said the rationale for this lecture is for you to publish a paper. And these three elements may well hold the key to publication success. With no serious thoughts on these three vital elements, it would almost result to leaving accessibility of the research paper up to chance. Now, keywords, title, and abstract operate in a system analogous to a chain reaction. Once keywords have helped people find the research paper, your paper, and then an effective title has successfully drawn in the reader's attention, it is now the abstract of the research paper that will further trigger the reader's interest. This alone serves to make an abstract an indispensable component within the research paper format. However, formulating the abstract of a research paper can be tedious, given that abstracts need to be fairly comprehensive without giving too much away. And this is mainly because if readers get all the details of the research paper in the abstract itself, they might be discouraged from reading the entire article since they already have gotten, well, what they want to look for, what they want to find in your paper. And so, you don't really give much information when you write your abstract. So, the title, the abstract, and the keywords, why is it important to get them right? You see, the title, the abstract, and the keywords play a pivotal role in communication of research. Without them, most papers may never be read or even be found by interested readers. Most electronic search engines, databases, and journal websites will use the words found in your title and abstract and your list of keywords to decide whether and when to display your paper to interested readers. And therefore, these three elements enable the dissemination of your research. Without them, without good title, abstract, and keywords, readers would not be able to find or cite your paper. And therefore, the title and abstract are the only parts of a paper that are freely available online. The title and the abstract, they are freely available online. And hence, once readers find your paper, they will read through the title and abstract to determine whether or not to purchase a full copy of your paper and continue reading. And finally, the abstract, the first section of your paper that journal editors and reviewers read. While busy, journal editors may use the abstract to decide whether to send the paper for peer review or reject it outright. Reviewers will form their first impression about your paper on reading it. You must understand that when you submit a paper to a publisher, the journal editors will either they read your abstract first, and then from the abstract they can decide to reject it outright or give your paper to a peer reviewer, because reviewers or peer reviewers really will need to read your paper. They form their first impression about your paper on reading it. And so let's begin with how to write a good title for a research paper. Journal websites and search engines use the words in research paper titles to display articles to interested readers. And readers use the title as the first step to determine whether or not to read an article. And that is why it is important for us, for you to know how to write a good title for a research paper. And good research paper titles, typically 10 to 12 words long, use descriptive terms and phrases that accurately highlight the core content of the paper. So you must understand that titles should not have more than 12 words, meaning you need to write a title that's not very, very long. That's not very, very long, up to 12 words. Now, we'll talk of some 3 basic tips on writing a good research paper title, and this is my reference. Now, writing a research paper title requires some serious thoughts. And the challenge with most authors is, with much comprehensive details of the research paper, how do I make my research paper title concise without sacrificing any relevant elements? Meaning, how do I write the title in such a way that it will give a descriptive information of what the paper is all about without writing a very lengthy title? Titles of your research paper is very important determinant of how many people will read it. And a good research paper title condenses, summarizes the paper's content in a few words, and it should capture the reader's attention. It should differentiate the paper from other papers of the same subject area. And so, here are 3 basic tips to keep in mind while writing a title. First, keep it simple, brief, and attractive. Title's primary function is to provide a precise summary of the paper's content. But you need to keep it brief and clear, and use active verbs instead of complex noun-based phrases, and avoid unnecessary details. It will just increase the length of your paper. And good title for a research paper is typically around 10 to 12 words, as I said a while ago, and a lengthy title may seem unfocused and take the reader's attention away from an important point. That is why you need to keep the title brief and yet clear. So, for example, you need to avoid this. Drug XYZ has an effect on muscular contraction for an hour in snails of Achatina full CSPC. This title does not seem to give us a clear summary of what the paper is all about. So, better that you say, for example, drug XYZ induces muscular contraction in Achatina fulcia nails. Direct to the point. So, remove unnecessary phrases, unnecessary terms like for an hour. You don't really need them. Now, another example, does vaccinating children and adolescents with inactivated influenza virus inhibit spread of influenza in unimmunized residents of rural communities? And this title has just too many unnecessary words. So, you might want to shorten it with this one: Influenza Vaccination of Children, a Randomized Trial. Well, this is short, except that this title does not give enough information about what makes the manuscript interesting. So you need somehow to give more meat to your paper to make your title, to make your paper interesting. So you might want to revise this: Effect of child influenza vaccination on infection rates in rural communities, a randomized trial. And this is an effective title. It is short, easy to understand, and conveys the important aspects of your research. Tip number 2, use appropriate descriptive words. Put keywords used in the manuscript and describe the nature of the study. So include terms people would use to search for your study. Because as we said, these words, these will be the words that people, the keywords that people might look for, might put in their search engine, so that your paper can be searched, can be seen by people searching for literature. So, for example, you need to avoid this: effects of drug A on schizophrenia patients, study of multi-center mixed group. So again, this paper does not seem to be clear. So you might want to say psychosocial effects of drug A on schizophrenia patients, a multi-center randomized controlled trial. So this is a lot better, clear, and easy to understand. And lastly, avoid abbreviations and jargon. Known abbreviations like AIDS, NATO, WHO, and so on can be used in the title. The lesser known or specific abbreviations and jargon and familiar to readers should be left out. So you need to avoid this. MMP expression profiles cannot distinguish between normal and early osteoarthritic synovial fluid. Okay, just have to spell out this MMP, because MMP really is not familiar to readers. Now, let's go to how to write a research paper abstract. Again, this is my source. Now, abstract helps the reader decide whether there is something in the body of the paper worth reading. As we said a while ago, this is the first thing that people will read, and it should provide a quick and accurate summary of the entire paper, explaining why your research was conducted, what the aims were, how these were met, and what the main findings were. And there are, we talk of the different types of abstracts, but generally, abstract can be between 100 to 300 words, up to 300 words in length. And there are of different types: the descriptive, informative, and structured. And we'll discuss each of these types. Descriptive abstracts are usually used in social sciences and humanities. They do not give specific information about methods and results. So just descriptive information, and these are normally used in non-medical, in social sciences and humanities. Informative abstracts are commonly used in sciences and present information on the background. There is information on the background, the aim, the methods, the results, and the conclusion. Now, structured abstracts are essentially informative because they talk of the background, the aim, the methods, and the results, and the discussion, except that they are divided into a series of headings. So we have subheadings there: headings for objectives, methods, results, and conclusion, and are typically found in the medical literature, clinical trial reports. So, medical journals normally use structured abstract. And we want you, when you write later on your paper, you will have to write a structured abstracts. Now, some tips that you can follow to write an abstract. First, begin writing the abstract after you have finished writing the whole paper. Well, that should be obvious. You can't make an abstract if you don't have yet a finished paper. And then, first, answer the questions, what problems are you trying to solve? Because research begins with a problem, so you need to tell us this background on the problem. What problem are you trying to solve? What motivated you to do so? What's the rationale for your papers? Same as saying. And by picking out the major objectives, hypotheses, and conclusions from your introduction and conclusion section. So, you look at your objectives, hypotheses, conclusions. And then next, answer the question, how did you go about achieving your objective? And this is done by selecting key sentences and phrases from your methods section. And then now reveal your findings by listing the major results from the results section. And then finally, answer the question, what are the implications of your findings? Okay, so all of these things are what you write in the abstract. Now, for unstructured abstracts, you arrange the sentences and phrases selected in the steps a while ago that we talked, and then into a single paragraph, write this into a single paragraph in the following sequence: the introduction, methods, results, and conclusion. So all of this is an informative type of abstract, except that this is unstructured. So you don't have really a subheading for this. All of this just in one paragraph. Now, for structured abstracts, use the following headings. You have some headings: the background, including the objective of the study, the results, and the methods, the results, and the conclusion. Now, make sure that this paragraph is well contained and does not include, in the abstract, it should not include information not present in the paper. You see, I remember one time I was a peer reviewer. I was asked to peer review an article, an international article. I won't tell you the medical journal, but I reviewed a paper from an international journal. And then in the abstract, when I first read the abstract, there were information that when I tried to read the whole of the paper in the results sections, I didn't see the section that was written in the abstract from the results section. So really, you ensure that you should make sure that this paragraph does not contain information not present in the paper. And then the abstract should not include figures and tables and abbreviations. You should not be writing abbreviations. You don't have review, literature review, or reference citation in the abstract. And ensure that the paragraph is written in the past tense. And check that the information flows well, preferably in the following order: purpose, basic study design, techniques used, major findings, conclusions, and implications. Okay, now and then check the final abstract. Does it contain information that is consistent with that presented in the paper? So the information that you write in the abstract should also be contained, should really be contained in the actual research section. And it should meet the guidelines of the targeted journal. So you need, before publishing a paper, you need to read the guidelines of the target journals. For example, the word limit, limit for the abstract, the type of abstract, etc. And it should not contain typographical error, as this may lead referees or peer reviewers, referees or peer reviewers, they are synonymous, and editors to conclude that the paper is bad and should be rejected outright. So no typographical errors, no grammatical errors even. Now, lastly, we talk of the keywords. Then how do we choose appropriate keywords in the research paper? Journals, search engines, and indexing and abstracting services classify papers using keywords, and thus an accurate list of keywords will ensure correct indexing and help showcase your research to interested groups. And this in turn will increase the chances of your paper being read and then subsequently cited. So you read through the paper. When you read through the paper, the whole of the paper, list down the terms and phrases that are used repeatedly in the text. And then ensure that this list includes all main key terms, phrases, and a few additional key phrases. And then include variants of the term or phrase. For example, include kidney and renal, these are variants, and drug names, procedures, and include common abbreviations of terms that which we often use in your paper. For example, HIV. And then refer to a common vocabulary term list and indexing standards in your discipline. In medicine, for example, we use the mesh thesaurus, mesh. And ensure that the terms you have used matched those used in these resources. So the keywords that you should be writing, that you should be choosing, should be mesh terms as well. And finally, before you submit your article, type your keywords in the search engine and check if the results that show up match the subject of your paper. So just try to type the keywords that you have written in PubMed, for example, and then look into whether the same subject paper will be shown in the display. And this will help you determine whether the keywords in your research paper are appropriate for the topic of your article. And then in conclusion, while it may be challenging to write effective titles and abstracts and to choose appropriate keywords, there is no denying the fact that it is definitely worth putting in extra time to get this right. After all, these three smallest segments of your papers have the potential to significantly impact your chances of getting published, read, and subsequently cited. Okay? So, we talk of writing the introduction next. So, after we have, writing the introduction, this will be the next part of the paper. So after the title, the abstract, and the keywords will be the introduction. And just some acknowledgement, some slides were taken from the lecture of, Dr. Joey La Peña of UPPGH in the Philippine Association of Medical Journal Editors. Now, Basically, the research paper should be written in an IMRAD format. The medical journal should be written in an IMRAD format. And IMRAD is an acronym. I stands for introduction, and the introduction should be telling us why did you study, and then M stands for methods or methodology. It should be telling us who, what, when, where, and how did you study, and then R, results. It should be telling us what did you find, and A, just end, and D, discussion, what do the findings mean. But first, we will be talking of the introduction. First, the purpose of the introduction. Why do we need to write, or what is the rationale for the introduction, for writing the introduction? The introduction should familiarize and orient, and it does so. It familiarizes and it orients by providing first the context of your work, stating your focus, second, and giving justification for your work. So, first we talk of providing the context of your work. It should introduce by a specific topic. When you provide context of your work, you need to introduce a specific topic. And that topic comes from a problem. And it should be able to provide a background about what has already been done, supported by a limited number of relevant references. So from the specific topic, from the problem that you have identified, that you provide a background, what has already been done, and then a limited number of relevant references. It should inform as well about the purpose of your work, what it will address, and how it relates to previous work. And it should define gap in knowledge by reviewing inconsistencies, deficiencies in the literature. I'll be talking more on this, inconsistencies in the literature, in a little while. Second is stating your focus by way of stating your research hypothesis and your research question. You state the focus by stating your research hypothesis and your research question, and this research hypothesis or research question can be seen as a consequence of the problem that you have identified and from the review of literature that you have found, and then this is now your research hypothesis. And lastly, giving justification for your work. You need to tell us what the rationale of your current study is, why did you study, why your research is important, and why your research will answer your question. So it also will talk of the significance of your paper. Because the way the context, the focus, and the justification of your work in the introduction is written will actually set the direction that you will take when you finally write your discussion later on. Okay, and the introduction consists mainly of 5 parts. The research problem, the studies that have addressed the problem, the deficiencies, the inconsistencies in the previous studies, the rationale and the significance of the study, and then the hypothesis, the purpose of the or aim of the study. We'll discuss each of these 5 parts now. Okay, first, the research problem. You see, research always begins with a problem. And then you need to write what the problem is. What is the problem that you have identified that really prompted you to make your research? And in the research problem, you first may have to describe the background of the problem, and even the magnitude of the problem, and then its implication if it is not resolved. So you need to tell us as well the implication of the problem. And then we need to look as well the studies that have addressed the problem. So you need to review studies that have examined the problem. So you have stated what the problem is, and then what do studies say, what do previous studies say with regard to the problem that you have examined. And in the review of literature found in the introduction, because we will be talking of review of literature in the introduction, large groups of studies are summarized instead of individual studies. And in contrast to the ROL section, we still have an ROL section, especially if we are talking of a proposal, individual studies are discussed. And the purpose of reviewing studies in the introduction is to justify the importance of the study and create distinction between past studies and your current study. We can also talk of deficiencies in the past literature. They may exist because topics have not been explored in a particular group, sample, or population, and so literature may need to be replicated to see if the same findings hold given a new sample for people or new site for the study. The study that you are doing now, the study may be the same from the previous studies, except that you are now using another new set of sample, new people, new site for the study, and you want to know whether their findings will also hold in your own study, in your own population. And the voice of the underrepresented groups has not been heard in published literature. So this can also be a deficiency in the past literature. There can be flaws in the methodology of the previous study, like the research design. It didn't use a good research design. The sampling methodology, it didn't use a scientific sampling methodology. There is absence of control in a clinical trial or inappropriate statistical tests. Previous studies may also have small sample size, and then mention how your study, your present study, will remedy or address these deficiencies. And then the rationale and the significance of the study. So, tell us what the basis of your study is, the scientific, physiological, biochemical, or even the mechanism or results from previous studies. And then significance of the study can also be the practical application of the study and then improvement in the practice of the profession. Okay, and lastly, the fifth part is your hypothesis and the purpose of the study. You state your hypothesis, if it's an analytic study, and then the aim or the direction or the objective of the study. Okay, so these are the 5 parts of the introduction. And these 5 parts of the introduction can actually be written using the 3-paragraph rule. So when you write your introduction, you might want to write the introduction using the 3-paragraph rule. The first paragraph should be talking of what the problem is, the specific topic. So, describing the magnitude of the problem, the background of the problem, the magnitude of the problem, and describe the problem to be investigated, summarize relevant research to provide context and concepts, and show the rationale for your study. Show the rationale for your study. Now, the second paragraph should be talking of gap in the literature, inconsistency in the literature. Review relevant research to provide rationale as well. I talked about rationale in the first paragraph. The second paragraph, when you talk of the literature, should also provide for the rationale. And this rationale and the rationale for in the literature will be more, you will have this rationale if there are inconsistency in the literature, if there is a gap or inconsistency in the literature. You see, a lot of people, when they write the previous studies, people provide literature that support their hypothesis. You don't do that, because if all literature point to yours, to the hypothesis that you want to look at, and then why is there a need for your study? We already know it. So there should be inconsistency in the literature. And this inconsistency in the literature will provide rationale for your study. Now, this is the reason why I'm making this research, because there are inconsistent findings in the literature. And then there can also be some limitations in the previous study. And in the last paragraph, you tell us your hypothesis. So provide justification and the rationale for your study. Okay, or, well, this, instead of the rationale, the significance of your study. And describe your ideas, hypothesis, aims, or objectives. Significance of the study may also be written here. You see, the write-up of the introduction should have this storyline. First, we talk of what the problem is that you have identified, the magnitude of the problem, and then the rationale for your study. And then in the second paragraph, you should be looking at what do literature say. Many studies about the problem that you have identified. What do previous studies say with regard to the problem that you have identified? And as I said a while ago, there should be inconsistency in the literature. There should be inconsistency in the literature. And because there is now inconsistency in the literature, the last paragraph should be talking of, and therefore, this is my hypothesis. This is my hypothesis. And thus, this study aims to, that it will also give us the objective of the study, and then finally, the significance of the study. All the introduction, all in just 3 paragraphs. Now, pitfalls in the introduction, overlong and unnecessary background in the introduction section. You see, I read a lot of papers submitted to me for comments, and the introduction many times is written very, very lengthily, 2, 3, 4 pages. And sometimes I read the introduction once, twice, sometimes 3 times. And after reading the introduction 3 times, I still cannot make sense of the paper, because the introduction should be telling us why will you study. I can't make sense what really is the reason for this study. And that is why it's always good to write the introduction using the 3-paragraph rule, so that your introduction will be much more focused. Another pitfall, exaggerating or understating the importance of your work. Either you exaggerate your paper, saying that this is the first of a kind of paper, or you understate the importance of your paper as well. And an extensive listing of references and review. Too many review of literature. Too many objectives not clearly stated. And then inclusion of results and conclusion in the introduction section. You don't include the results and the conclusion in the introduction. And use of improper tenses, because the introduction is largely present tense. Okay. Now, let's talk of writing the methodology. So just to go back, the IMRAD format. So introduction is why did you study, and then and methods, what, who, what, when, where, and how did you study, the results, what did you find, and then the discussion, what did the findings mean. You will note that with IMRAD, there is no objective, no section for the objective, no section for the review of literature. And that's the IMRAD format, the medical journal format. Because the reason why there is no objective here, no section for the objective, is that, as I talked about a while ago, the objectives are written in the last paragraph of the introduction. The review of literature section is written in the second paragraph of the introduction. That is why after the introduction, we go immediately to the methods. So we'll now discuss how to write the methods or the methodology section. And this is my reference from the ICMJE. ICMJE is International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. The methods section should be clear about how and why a study was done in a particular way. The clarity about, more especially, the how and the why. And the methodology should be written with sufficient details such that others with access to the data would be able to reproduce the results. You see, sometimes when we talk of the methodology section, we compare writing of the methodology section as to writing the recipe. When you write the recipe has to be written with sufficient details so that other competent cook can be able to exactly cook the same way you want them to. So in much the same way, when you write the methodology section, it should contain sufficient details. And it should include only information that was available at the time the plan or the protocol for the study was being written. Because you are talking of the methodology section, it should only contain information during the time of protocol making. All information obtained during the study, during the actual gathering, belongs to the results section. If an organization was paid or otherwise contracted to help conduct the research, so for example, in terms of data collection and data management, then this should be detailed in the methods section. And it should include a statement indicating that the research was approved by an independent local, regional, or national review, ethics committee, or the institutional review board. Just have to tell that this paper was submitted and approved by this particular ethics board. The selection and description of the participants should be clearly described. You can talk of if they are healthy individuals or patients or controls. They have to be described, and including the eligibility criteria. When we talk of the eligibility criteria, we talk of the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, and of course the description of the source population. Because the relevance of such variables as age, sex, ethnicity is not always known at the time of the study design, because we have not collected data yet, researchers should aim for inclusion of representative population into all study types, and at minimum provide descriptive data for this and other relevant demographic variables. Ensure correct use of terms like sex when reporting biological factors, and gender when talking of identity, psychosocial or cultural factors. So don't say gender if you mean sex. And unless inappropriate, report sex and or gender of study participants, sex of animals or cells, or describe the methods used to determine sex and gender, if applicable. If the study was done involving an exclusive population, for example, in only one sex, authors should justify why, except of course for some obvious cases, if the study is about prostate cancer or the study is about uh, uh, myoma for females. An author should define how they determine race or ethnicity if applicable, and justify their relevance. Authors should use neutral, precise, and respectful language to describe the study participants and avoid the use of terminology that might stigmatize the participants. In the technical information, you specify the study's main and secondary objectives. Usually, these secondary objectives or main, primary, or secondary objectives usually are identified in the method sections as primary or secondary outcomes. And these primary and secondary outcomes, they come from the objectives of the study. Identify methods, equipment. When you have the equipment that you use, you give the manufacturer's name and address in parentheses, and procedures in sufficient details to allow others to reproduce the results. Give references to established methods, including statistical methods. Provide references and brief description of methods that have been published but are not well known. And describe new or substantially modified methods, give the reasons for using them, and evaluate their limitations. And then identify precisely all drugs if your paper is a clinical trial, or chemicals used, including generic names, doses, routes of administration, and identify appropriate scientific names or generic names. And under statistics, you describe the statistical methods with enough detail to enable knowledgeable reader with access to the original data to judge its appropriateness for the study and to verify reported results. If they want, for example, to verify the results that you have reported, so you need to describe the statistical methods with enough detail. And when possible, quantify findings and present them with appropriate indicators of measurement error or uncertainty by using confidence, by talking of confidence interval. Avoid relying solely on statistical hypothesis testing such as p-values, which fail to convey important information about the effect size and the precision of the estimates. And that is why you need to talk of confidence interval as well. And references for the design of the study and statistical methods should be a standard works when possible, especially if the statistics is something that is not common, that is not usual. Define statistical terms, abbreviations, and most symbols. Specify the statistical software package and version that you use, and then distinguish pre-specified from explanatory analysis, including subgroup analysis if you have. And so, these are the components in the methods. What has been done, what did you look for, how is it done, how data was analyzed, and then use past tense and do not include results here. So the study design, you specify what the study design is. If it's a case report, a case series, a clinical trial, if it's a clinical trial, you need to talk of specific clinical trials. So double-blind, single-blind, randomized, open-label. And if it is an observational study, just tell us if it's a cross-sectional study, a case control study, or a cohort study, or is it a sensitivity analysis or a meta-analysis. And in the setting, who is the study about? So the participants, what did you do, the intervention and the follow-up, and what did you look for, the outcome measures. How participants were recruited, talk of the source population, the sampling methodology, inclusion, exclusion criteria, and then the sample size calculation, and then the circumstances by which the intervention was done, the laboratory setting, inpatient's consent, and ethical clearance. And then, if there are interventions or tests, if standard, give the reference. If new or modified, provide details. And this should be sufficient for reproduction by others. And then the timing and the duration of the intervention, the equipment, kits, and manufacturer. And then define the outcomes operationally that you want to look for. State parameters to assess the outcome, specify endpoints, cutoff values if applicable, and adverse events if any. And then if there are follow-up, specify the frequency, methods, and duration, including the minimum acceptable duration and minimum number of follow-up. Determine criteria for termination or dropout. Now, if it's a clinical trial, you talk of per protocol analysis or intention to treat analysis. Then provide what statistical test to use for each objective. So, identify the software used, including the version, as we have said a while ago. Now, some pitfalls in the writing of your introduction. Insufficient details in the procedure, such that reproducibility is not assured. You cannot reproduce the study because there is not much details. Lack of inclusion-exclusion criteria, and the exclusion criteria that people write is just the opposite of the inclusion criteria. So this is wrong and biased, not controlled. Okay, so next we write the results and the discussion. So again, the IMRAD that we talked about a while ago, and then now we'll be talking of the results. So the results should be telling us, what did you find? What did you find? And begin with a narrative report. A lot of people, especially students, and even residents, even doctors in training, will begin the results with a table. You need to begin your write-up, the results section, with a narrative report, because the narrative is the most important. And review, analyze data, and determine which results to present. When you review the results section, the results, when you review the results from the data given to you by your statistician, determine. Not all results given to you by your statisticians need to be presented. So determine which results to present, and decide which results are relevant to your research question and objectives. Now, report its outcome written in the methodology. So we talked of the outcome, we report the outcome, and present summarized data. Do not present raw data in your results. Then supplement with tables and graphs. Later on, we'll be talking of tables and graphs, figures, and there should be no repetition between texts and tables. Meaning, when you already have written it narratively, you don't have to put it in the table. No repetition between text and tables. A lot of people will write narratively the results, and then they see the results in the table, and then some other would present it, the same findings, using figures or graphs. So there should be no repetition between text, tables, and graphs. And do not interpret the results. Do not give conclusions. In medicine, we separate the results from the discussion. In some other professions, like nursing journals, for example, they talk of results and discussion. And that is why when they talk of the results, they already give the interpretation of the results. But in medicine, because we separate the results from the discussion, you don't give interpretation of the results. The interpretation of the results will be written later on in the discussion section. Now, some pitfalls, illogical sequence in the data presentation. So you need to present first the demographic information, or the number of subjects that you have gotten, and then the characteristics, the demographic characteristics of the population. Begin with that and then go to the meat after that. So there is inappropriate data presentation. You talk of graphs when that should have been presented in a narratively or in a table. So there is overuse of tables and graphs. Sometimes you use the tables and the graphs for the same findings. And avoid the squid technique. Squid technique, the author is doubtful about his or her facts or reasoning and retreats behind a cloud of ink. Is not very sure of his findings, and so he retreats behind. That's a cloud of ink. That's actually the squid technique. Now, relevant data collected from the experiment should be presented, from the study should be presented. These are relevant. And the main result should be presented without going into the discussion or in the conclusion, because as we said, we are just talking of the results. The analyzed data should be presented in a form of a table, figure, or in a default text form. So you just talk of tables and figures if you need them, and the result should be written in the past tense. And then lastly, the discussion. We write the discussion, how the discussion should be talking of what do the findings mean, and this is where interpretation of the results should be written. So in the discussion, you summarize the most important findings and then give the conclusion of the primary outcome. So you first give a summary of the most important finding in the discussion, and then after giving a summary, this should actually be in the first paragraph, the summary of the most important finding. This conclusion should be in the last paragraph. But these are the things that you write in the discussion. The first thing that you need to write will be the summary of the most important findings. After you have given the summary in the first paragraph of the most important findings, you compare, is your study, are the results of your study comparable or consistent with other studies? So you compare your studies with previous studies. And then if there are differences, give plausible explanation. Give scientific pathway in the explanation if you must, and then the basic science linkage or relationship. So the point is, you just have to give explanation, plausible explanation. If your results are inconsistent with previous studies, you need to give us a plausible explanation. And then after making a comparison with the previous studies, talk of the implication of your research. Implications could be clinical implications or research implications, and then even future research application, next future research. And then after giving the implication, you provide the limitation of your study, the caveats of your study. So the limitation could be in the form of the study population, may not be appropriate or whatever, or the study design, or your study collected data retrospectively. So you might want to talk of, you might a more valid conclusion might be done if you collected data prospectively, and your study was an observational study. It should have been an RCT, a randomized control study, should have been done. Then the measurement limitations, then some subjective definition of some variables. So these are things that you need to write on even the sample size for your limitation of your study. And then lastly, your conclusion. This should be the last paragraph. In the conclusion, you actually copy and paste the first paragraph of the discussion. We talked about the first paragraph as the summary of the main findings. So you copy that first paragraph to the last, paste it to the last paragraph, and that will serve as your conclusion. But you need to paraphrase that paragraph, because the conclusion is actually the summary, the same as the summary of the primary outcome, as we said a while ago. So that the first paragraph, the last paragraph should be talking of the same things, except that the last paragraph is a paraphrase of the first paragraph. Do they have concise and consistent message? Okay? Yeah, I think that's the last slide in my discussion. So we'll end here, and then later on we'll proceed with the next topic.